As he passed by the pool boy, a widowed millionaire trembled when he saw him wearing a ring identical to the one his missing son had. When the young man explained where he had found it, the man burst into tears. The rain beat persistently against the huge office windows, creating a monotonous sound that echoed through the empty corridors of the mansion. Robert remained seated behind his imposing mahogany desk, watching the drops slide down the glass like silent tears. His graying hair, once perfectly combed, now fell misaligned over his wrinkled forehead, reflecting the 15 years of torment he had lived through. His trembling hands held a cup of already cold coffee, while his red and tired eyes stared into emptiness. The office, which once pulsed with the energy of prosperous business, now breathed the heavy air of an abandoned crypt. Another day without news. Another day of hope that vanishes like water between fingers, he muttered to himself, feeling the weight of loneliness crushing his chest like an ancient stone. The sound of the doorbell echoed through the silent mansion, cutting through the heavy air like a sharp blade. Robert slowly raised his gaze, recognizing the firm footsteps approaching along the polished marble corridor. It was Michael, the last private detective he had hired. A middle-aged man with a grey mustache and an always serious expression who carried the weight of many failed investigations. For the past 6 months, Michael had traveled through every shadowy alley, every forgotten shelter, every lost corner of the city in search of clues about Mike's whereabouts. His leather boots worn by time echoed in the empty corridor, announcing his arrival like a funeral bell. Now he walked with a worn leather briefcase under his arm and a countenance that carried the weight of bitter truths. "Mr. Robert, I need to speak urgently with you about your son Mike's case," said Michael, stopping in front of the desk and adjusting his tie with a nervous gesture that revealed his apprehension. Robert gestured for the detective to sit in the leather armchair in front of him, trying to maintain his composure, despite his heart racing like a wild horse. The shelves filled with dusty books on business law and the expensive paintings on the walls seemed to observe the scene with judgmental looks, silent witnesses to a fortune that was falling apart like a sandcastle. Michael methodically opened his briefcase, removing yellowed documents, faded photographs, and voluminous reports he had compiled during months of meticulous and fruitless investigation. "Sir, I have reviewed every available lead, every witness still alive, every security camera that has withstood the time of the last 15 years, Michael began, organizing the papers on the desk with the care of someone handling sacred relics. The detective sighed deeply before continuing, knowing that the words he was about to pronounce would completely shatter the already fragmented heart of the man in front of him. Robert leaned forward, gripping the edges of the desk as if he were a castaway trying to stay afloat amid a furious storm. His hands, which once signed million-dollar contracts with absolute confidence and enviable firmness, now trembled like leaves in the autumn wind. The nervous tick in the left corner of his eye, developed after Mike's traumatic disappearance, pulsed with more intensity than ever, like a metronome marking the seconds of agony. The cold light of the grey afternoon filtered through the heavy curtains, creating dancing shadows that seemed to mock his misfortune. "What did you discover, Michael? Please tell me you found something. Any crumb of hope that gives me strength to see my boy again," pleaded Robert, his hoarse voice breaking on the last word like shattered glass. Michael took a deep breath, preparing to deliver the final blow to the already shattered soul of that father who had transformed into a ghost of himself. He removed a sealed envelope from the folder and carefully placed it on the desk, as if it were a bomb about to explode and devastate everything around it. The paper, yellowed by time, contained the final report of an investigation that had consumed not only precious time and financial resources, but also the last vestiges of hope that Robert still kept deep in his broken heart. Tears were already beginning to form in the corners of the millionaire's red eyes, anticipating the horror that hovered in the air like a hungry vulture. The silence in the office had become deafening, broken only by the melancholic tick-tock of the antique clock above the unlit fireplace. "Mr. Robert, after 15 years of intensive searches and exhaustive investigations, I must inform you with a heavy heart that we have absolutely exhausted all imaginable possibilities," said Michael, his voice laden with genuine sorrow and deep resignation. The detailed report revealed a meticulous chronology of the last traces left by Mike before his mysterious disappearance that had shaken the foundations of the family. On the fateful night 15 years ago, the 8-year-old boy had gone out to play in the vast garden of the mansion and simply vanished into thin air like smoke carried by the wind. The security cameras showed Mike running happily among the leafy trees at 6:30, his crystalline laughter echoing through the fragrant gardens. But after that crucial moment, it was as if the earth had completely swallowed him without leaving any traces. Michael had followed every imaginable lead with the determination of a bloodhound. Confused reports of children seen in distant shelters, lost boys found in other cities and provinces, even unidentified bodies discovered over the years in mysterious circumstances. I revisited every orphanage in the region and beyond, every known charity, every public and private hospital, every police station that keeps records of missing persons, explained Michael, flipping through the pages of the voluminous report with fingers that showed the deep fatigue of a search that had proven fruitless. Robert listened to every word, as if they were nails being methodically hammered into his emotional coffin. His considerable fortune, built over decades of hard work and tireless dedication in the prosperous real estate business, had been systematically drained to finance these endless investigations that multiplied like tentacles of a hungry hydra. He had sold profitable companies, valuable properties, and promising investments to pay for the best available detectives, the most advanced search technologies on the market, and even mediums and clairvoyants in moments of absolute despair that consumed him. Now, looking at the experienced man before him, he realized with painful clarity that he had reached the end of the line, the final chapter of a story that had begun with so much unconditional love and radiant hope. The office around him seemed to close in on him like the walls of a claustrophobic prison. "Sir, with a broken heart I must tell you that there are no more concrete leads to follow. Your son, Mike, after 15 years without any sign of life, probably did not survive the merciless streets of this cruel city," concluded Michael, lowering his tired eyes to avoid Robert's shattered, pleading gaze. The words hit Robert like a devastating lightning bolt on a day of apocalyptic storm, shattering the last microscopic fragments of hope he still carried in his lacerated chest. He rose abruptly from the leather chair, making it creak in protest, walking to the panoramic window with faltering steps of a man who had just received an emotional death sentence. Outside, the rain continued to fall relentlessly on the city, washing the golden leaves of the century-old trees where Mike used to play in his golden and innocent childhood. The extensive garden, once filled with crystalline childish laughter and innocent games that filled the air with joy, now seemed a melancholy cemetery of memories forever lost in the abyss of time. The flowers that Mike loved to smell had withered and died, replaced by weeds that grew wildly without care or attention. 15 years of my life, Michael. 15 whole years dedicated exclusively to finding him, investing every penny I owned, every drop of energy left in my tired body, and now you coldly tell me that it was all completely in vain, murmured Robert, resting his feverish forehead against the cold glass of the window. Michael silently gathered his documents and photographs, understanding with sensitivity that his presence was no longer necessary or desired in that moment of deep mourning. He rose from the leather armchair with careful and respectful movements, like someone who fears disturbing a solemn funeral or profaning a sacred sanctuary. Before departing definitively, he placed his calloused hand on Robert's hunched shoulder in a final gesture of human solidarity, but understood that no words in the world could ease the searing pain consuming the heart of that shattered father. The metallic sound of the detective's footsteps echoed through the marble corridor until completely disappearing in the distance, leaving Robert absolutely alone with his eternal ghosts and corrosive regrets that tormented him day and night. "Thank you sincerely for your dedicated services, Michael. I know you did absolutely everything within your reach, and then some," said Robert without turning around, his voice echoing against the glass like a ghostly lament. After Michael's melancholy departure, Robert remained completely motionless before the window for long minutes that seemed like eternal hours, watching the rain transform the world outside into a grey and melancholic blur that perfectly mirrored his devastated state of mind. His tired mind traveled inexorably through time, reliving each precious and golden moment he had shared with Mike before the traumatic disappearance that shattered his existence. He vividly remembered the sunny Sunday mornings when they would wake up early to prepare fragrant pancakes together in the spacious kitchen, the quiet nights when he read exciting adventure stories before Mike peacefully fell asleep in his protective arms, the joyful walks in the municipal park where he had taught the boy to ride a bicycle with infinite patience and unconditional love. Each golden memory was now a brutal stab in the heart, a cruel and merciless reminder of everything he had lost forever in the dark abyss of inexorable time. My dear Mike, where are you at this moment? Daddy, who loves you so much, couldn't protect you when you needed me most, he whispered against the fogged glass, leaving an ephemeral mark of vapor that soon disappeared like everything else in his life. Robert's devastating financial reality had become as dark and desperate as his shattered emotional state. The incessant and obsessive search for Mike had consumed practically all his considerable fortune, transforming a solid and prosperous business empire into smoking ruins and bitter rubble. The unpaid bills accumulated on his desk like insurmountable mountains of paper and ink, each envelope representing another stab at his tattered dignity. The loyal staff of the mansion had been waiting for months for their overdue salaries, looking at him with a mixture of pity and resentment that cut his soul like a sharp razor. He had mortgaged the family property multiple times to finance the expensive investigations, and now the greedy banks were beginning to press mercilessly for payments that he simply could no longer honor with dignity. How can I fire honest people who have faithfully served me for so many years of dedication? How can I look directly into their eyes and confess that I no longer have money even to pay their deserved salaries? He questioned himself in anguish, feeling the crushing weight of responsibility crush his shoulders already bent by chronic pain. Robert slowly made his way to his imposing desk, where the cursed list with the full names of all the dedicated mansion staff rested. There were 23 hard-working people who depended exclusively on him to support their humble families with dignity. Experienced gardeners who cared for the flowers with affection, efficient housekeepers who kept the house impeccable, vigilant security guards who protected the property, talented cooks who prepared delicious meals, and reliable drivers who had dedicated precious years of their lives to the loyal service of the family. Each name carefully written on the list represented not just a necessary job, but legitimate dreams, genuine hopes, and family responsibilities that he would now be forced to ruthlessly destroy with his own trembling hands. The moral weight of this decision was almost unbearable for a man who had always prided himself on treating his employees with genuine justice and respect. Sincerely forgive me for failing you too who trusted me. You infinitely deserve a better boss than this shattered and pathetic man I have become, he murmured with a choked voice as he signed each official document with salty tears, spraying the official paper. The old telephone rang insistently on the desk, but Robert had neither the strength nor the will to answer. Yet another call that would certainly bring additional problems. He instinctively knew they were impatient creditors, collecting astronomical debts, calculating lawyers discussing complex legal proceedings, or perhaps some last opportunistic detective offering expensive services that he definitely could no longer afford with his bankrupt financial situation. He had reached the critical point where each phone call represented only more unsolvable problems and devastating bad news that accumulated like a relentless avalanche. He unplugged the old device from the socket with a sudden and definitive movement, symbolically cutting his last remaining connection with the hostile outside world that judged and charged him. The sepulchral silence that followed was absolutely deafening, filled only by the melancholic sound of persistent rain and the irregular beats of his wounded heart that struggled to keep functioning. I no longer want to hear empty promises or false hopes that torture me. I am profoundly tired of living in this endless hell of uncertainties and constant suffering, he said with bitterness to the silent walls of the office that echoed his words back like mocking ghosts. Robert opened the heavy central drawer of his desk with hands that trembled uncontrollably like leaves in the wind. Inside, kept like a sacred and precious treasure, was the last blessed portrait he had taken with Mike just days before the cursed disappearance that shattered their lives. In the time-faded photograph, both smiled radiantly during a cheerful picnic in the fragrant garden of the mansion, with Mike proudly holding a shiny silver ring he had received as a special birthday gift. The angelic boy had the same expressive brown eyes as his father and a luminous smile that lit up any environment like a ray of sunshine. His blonde, curly hair gracefully swayed in the gentle wind, and his chubby, healthy child cheeks radiated contagious life and happiness that now existed only in tormenting memory. Robert caressed the photograph gently with trembling fingers, as if he could magically touch his beloved son's face through the fragile, yellowed paper. "You were absolutely everything to me, my adored boy. You were the only true reason why I woke up every morning and worked tirelessly to build a bright and prosperous future for us both," he whispered with infinite tenderness, delicately kissing Mike's sacred image. The devastating guilt that Robert carried in his chest was infinitely heavier than any physical burden he had ever endured during his tortured existence. On that fateful and cursed night, he had solemnly promised his dear son that he would play with him in the fragrant garden after finishing a business call that he considered important and urgent at the time. Mike had waited patiently in the comfortable living room, leafing through a colorful book of enchanted stories, until childish boredom overcame him and he decided to go out alone to play innocently among the familiar trees. When Robert finally finished the business call an hour later, he found only terrifying silence and absolute emptiness where the crystalline and melodious laughter of his beloved boy should have been. This crucial moment of paternal negligence, this terrible prioritization of work over his precious son, had haunted his nightmares for 15 consecutive and torturous years without rest or relief. If I had hung up that cursed phone, if I had chosen you instead of insignificant business, absolutely none of this would have happened, and you would be here with me, he lamented with deep agony, punching the desk with enough force to knock down some objects that scattered across the floor. The majestic mansion around Robert seemed to painfully breathe the vivid memories of infinitely happier times. When Mike ran through the extensive corridors cheerfully chasing his pet dog, or screamed with pure joy as he slid down the polished banister of the main staircase. Each luxurious room held precious traces of the boy's striking presence. The children's room still completely untouched, with colorful toys scattered exactly as Mike had left them on that cursed afternoon. The spacious kitchen where they used to make delicious cookies together on sunny weekends. The silent library where Robert read exciting adventure stories on rainy nights like this one. Now all these sacred spaces were just empty and melancholic sanctuaries of a golden happiness that would never return to bless his miserable existence. The walls seemed to cry invisible tears, and the expensive furniture silently witnessed the tragedy that befell the family. This house symbolically died on the same day you disappeared forever, Mike. It became just a somber mausoleum of golden memories that torture me with each painful breath, he confessed to the sacred portrait, feeling hot tears burn his cheeks wrinkled by suffering. The crushing weight of absolute solitude began to crush Robert like a relentless avalanche of ice and stone. In the first years after the traumatic disappearance, he still received sporadic visits from close friends and distant relatives who offered sincere support and well-intentioned consolation. Gradually, however, people progressively distanced themselves, unable to deal with his perpetual sadness and his unhealthy obsession with finding Mike at any cost. He had lost definitive contact with dear siblings, friends of decades, and even with the sacred memory of his deceased wife, which seemed to have been completely eclipsed by the overwhelming pain of the lost son. Now at 65 years of age, he found himself completely isolated from the hostile world, a voluntary prisoner of his own corrosive pain and eternal remorse that consumed him from within like acid. The enormous mansion had become his golden prison, where each corridor echoed with ghosts of the happy past. I have absolutely no one left in this cruel world, no valid reason to continue fighting uselessly against this pain that consumes me from within like eternal fire, he murmured with absolute despair, hugging the photograph against his chest as if it were his resurrected son himself. Robert rose from his chair with slow and deliberate movements, heading toward the sophisticated safe embedded in the wall behind an old painting depicting bucolic landscapes. His trembling fingers typed the sacred combination he had known by heart for 15 years, the blessed date of Mike's birth. The safe opened with a soft, mechanical click, revealing important family documents, valuable jewels inherited from past generations, and a small amber glass vial that he had kept for years without ever imagining that one day he would need to use it for such a dark and definitive purpose. The faded medical label indicated they were powerful sedatives prescribed after a delicate surgery years ago, but Robert instinctively knew that the concentrated quantity contained there would be more than enough to end his anguish. The vial seemed to pulse in his hands like an artificial heart, seeking a way out of his suffering. "Perhaps it's the only true way to reunite with you forever, my dear son. Perhaps on the other side I can finally embrace you again and ask forgiveness for having failed as a father," he thought with crystalline clarity, holding the vial against the faint light from the window. The tiny vial seemed to weigh cosmic tons in his trembling hands as Robert slowly returned to his leather chair like a condemned man walking to the scaffold. Each step echoed through the silent office like an inexorable countdown to the end of a journey that had become absolutely unbearable and meaningless. He placed the vial delicately on the polished desk beside the sacred photograph of Mike, creating a macabre altar dedicated to the profound despair and eternal longing that corroded his soul. His aristocratic hands, which once built a solid business empire brick by brick with sweat and determination, now could barely open the resistant cap of the small container without spilling its deadly contents onto the desk's surface. The silence in the office was now absolute, broken only by the distant sound of rain that continued to fall like tears from heaven. "Sincere forgiveness for being a completely failed father who couldn't protect you or find you when you most needed my protection and love," he whispered with a broken voice to the photograph, as if Mike could hear him through the lost years and the abyss of time. Robert looked at the vial of medication, feeling lost and hopeless. In a moment of total despair, he made a decision that almost cost him his life. They were small and seemingly harmless in appearance, but he knew with absolute certainty that they carried the terrible power to forever silence the pain that had hammered in his chest for a decade and a half of uninterrupted suffering. The melancholic sound of the rain outside seemed to intensify dramatically, as if nature itself was crying along with him in this final and definitive moment. He closed his tired eyes for an eternal instant, allowing himself to remember one last time Mike's crystalline laughter, his tight and warm hugs, his innocent questions about the wonderful world around him. "Forgive me, Mike. Daddy couldn't find you." The cold white light of the fluorescent tubes pierced Robert's eyelids like incandescent needles, forcing him to slowly awaken from a deep and nebulous void. His head throbbed with a dull and persistent pain, while the bitter taste of medications impregnated his cotton-dry mouth. The characteristic smell of hospital disinfectant invaded his nostrils, mixed with the aroma of ether and chemicals that made his stomach turn in nauseating waves. He tried to move his arms, but felt the resistance of intravenous tubes connected to his veins, and the monotonous sound of medical devices created an electronic symphony that echoed through the sterilized environment. Gradually, reality began to form in his confused mind. He was alive, lying on a hospital stretcher, covered with white sheets that smelled of bleach and despair. "Where am I? What happened to me? Why couldn't I have the peace I so desired?" he murmured with a hoarse voice, feeling his throat scratched as if he had swallowed ground glass. A man in a white coat approached the stretcher with measured and professional steps, carrying a clipboard full of papers and medical charts. It was Dr. Johnson, an experienced middle-aged physician with graying hair at the temples and kind eyes behind gold-framed glasses. His hands calloused by time revealed decades of experience saving lives and handling emergency situations like that one. The doctor observed Robert with an expression mixing relief and professional concern, checking the vital signs on the monitor before addressing the patient who had just returned from the threshold between life and death. His experienced eyes examined Robert's pale face, noting the deep marks of suffering that 15 years of agony had etched into his features. "Mr. Robert, my name is Dr. Johnson. You are at Central Hospital and have been through a very serious situation in the last 24 hours. We performed an emergency gastric lavage and fortunately managed to reverse the effects of the medication overdose you ingested," the doctor explained in a calm but firm voice, maintaining direct eye contact to ensure that Robert understood the gravity of the situation. Robert tried to sit up on the stretcher, but an overwhelming dizziness forced him to remain lying down, while confused fragments of the previous night began to return to his fragmented memory. He vaguely remembered the silent office, Mike's photograph, the bottle of medication, and the desperate decision he had made amid the absolute darkness of his soul. The metallic taste in his mouth and the empty feeling in his stomach confirmed that he had gone through a very difficult moment that almost resulted in tragedy, but fortunately, he was found in time. His hand instinctively moved to the place where he always kept Mike's photograph, but found only the thin fabric of the hospital pajamas that someone had dressed him in during his unconscious period. "I wanted to die, doctor. There's nothing left in this world keeping me alive after losing my son forever. Why did you bring me back to this hell of suffering?" questioned Robert, with tears streaming down his pale cheeks. Dr. Johnson pulled up a chair and sat beside the stretcher, demonstrating the patience and compassion that characterized his humanized approach with patients in situations of extreme emotional despair. He had seen many similar cases throughout his medical career, people who lost everything they considered important and reached the point of no longer being able to bear the pain of existence. He removed his glasses and carefully cleaned them with a handkerchief, buying time to choose the right words that could penetrate the armor of despair that Robert had built around his wounded heart. His decades of medical experience had taught him that, in these critical moments, each word could make the difference between recovery and a new attempt at self-termination. "Mr. Robert, I completely understand your pain and I won't pretend to know exactly how you feel. But I need to tell you how you got here, because there is someone who cares enough about your life to save it, when you had already completely given up on everything," said the doctor with touching sincerity, leaning slightly forward. The doctor explained that Robert had been found unconscious in his office around 6 in the morning by a young man who worked maintaining the mansion's pool. The young man, whose name was Matthew, had arrived early to perform the weekly maintenance of the aquatic area, and noticing that the office lights had been on since the previous night, decided to check if everything was all right with his employer. He found Robert unconscious in the chair, with the empty bottle of medication next to the desk and a photograph clutched against his chest. Without hesitating for even a second, Matthew had immediately called for medical emergency services and remained by Robert's side until the ambulance arrived, providing crucial information about the medications found at the scene. During the journey to the hospital, the young pool cleaner had followed the ambulance in his simple car, waiting for news in the hallway throughout the early morning with the genuine concern of someone who truly cared. "This young man named Matthew literally saved your life, Mr. Robert. Without his quick and decisive intervention, you wouldn't be here talking with me at this moment. He demonstrated extraordinary dedication and care for someone he barely knows," revealed Dr. Johnson, carefully observing Robert's reaction. Robert absorbed this information with a complex mixture of reluctant gratitude and deep embarrassment at having been saved by an employee he barely knew. The irony of the situation didn't go unnoticed. At the moment, he had decided to dismiss all employees because he could no longer afford their salaries. One of them had risked his own well-being to save him from death. He felt humiliated at having been found in that deplorable state by a young worker who probably earned a minimal fraction of what he used to spend on a single meal in prosperous times. At the same time, a strange curiosity began to awaken in his numbed heart about who exactly this Matthew was, who had shown such compassion for a stranger in despair. "I need to meet this young man personally and thank him for what he did for me. Where is he now? I hope he didn't feel obligated to remain here at the hospital because of me," said Robert, trying again to sit up despite the weakness that still dominated his debilitated body. Dr. Johnson explained that Matthew had remained at the hospital throughout the entire night, sleeping uncomfortably in the waiting room chairs and refusing to leave until he was certain that Robert was out of mortal danger. Only the following morning, when the doctors confirmed that the patient had completely stabilized, did the young man agree to return to the mansion to continue his work, but not before leaving his phone number and asking to be informed of any change in Robert's health condition. The doctor mentioned that he had been impressed with the genuine concern shown by Matthew, especially considering that most people in his social position would simply have called the ambulance and continued with their lives without becoming emotionally involved. There was something special about that young worker that went beyond simple professional courtesy or moral obligation. This Matthew seems to be an exceptional person with a truly kind heart. How many people nowadays would care enough to spend an entire night in a hospital looking after a stranger? Reflected Robert, feeling a strange pang of hope for the first time in years. After 2 days of rigorous medical observation and sessions with a psychologist specialized in suicide prevention, Robert finally received his hospital discharge on the condition that he would continue outpatient psychological monitoring. Dr. Johnson had insisted on the crucial importance of Robert not being alone in the first weeks after the suicide attempt, a period when people are most vulnerable to new attempts. Robert promised to seriously consider the possibility of hiring a companion or nurse, although he knew that his financial situation did not allow for major additional expenses. During the trip back to the mansion in the silent taxi, he observed the city through the window with slightly different eyes, as if seeing everything for the first time after returning from a long journey to personal hell. Perhaps God or fate have other plans for me. Perhaps there is still something I need to do before departing this cruel world, he thought as he watched people walking the streets with their seemingly normal and uncomplicated lives. Robert arrived at the mansion in the late afternoon, when the sun was beginning to set behind the garden trees, creating long shadows that danced across the well-maintained lawn. The property seemed slightly different to his eyes, perhaps because he was seeing everything with the perspective of someone who had been on the brink of death and unexpectedly returned to life. The sound of water being moved caught his attention to the pool area, where he could see a silhouette working diligently on the cleaning and maintenance of the aquatic area. It was Matthew, the young man who had saved his life, working with precise and careful movements, completely concentrated on his task. Robert approached slowly, observing the young man from afar before introducing himself, trying to form an initial impression of the person who had become his unexpected guardian angel. "So you're the one who brought me back from the darkness. I need to look into the eyes of this special person and express my gratitude properly," he muttered to himself, feeling a strange and unfamiliar emotion growing in his chest. Matthew was a young man of approximately 25 years, with a lean but strong physical constitution, the evident result of years performing honest manual labor. His light brown hair was slightly disheveled by the wind and sweat of work, and his simple but clean clothes revealed someone who took pride in his personal appearance despite obvious financial limitations. There was something in his movements that conveyed a natural serenity and genuine kindness that emanated from his being like a subtle but perceptible aroma. When he finally noticed Robert's presence, Matthew straightened immediately and walked toward him with a shy but warm smile illuminating his honest and expressive face. His hands, calloused from work but impeccably clean, fidgeted nervously as he approached the man he had saved from certain death. "Mr. Robert, what a joy to see you standing and apparently feeling better. I was very worried about your health since that terrible morning when I found you unconscious in the office," said Matthew with a sincere voice, his brown eyes shining with genuine happiness and relief. Robert extended his hand toward the young man, but Matthew hesitated for a moment, looking at his own wet and dirty hands from work, before quickly wiping them on the towel he carried over his shoulder. When they finally shook hands, Robert felt the strength and honesty of those working hands, so different from the soft, privileged hands of the businessman he used to deal with in his previous life. There was something deeply comforting in that simple handshake, a genuine human connection that Robert hadn't experienced in years of self-imposed isolation. Matthew's eyes revealed a genuine concern that went far beyond professional courtesy or fear of losing his job, demonstrating true care for the well-being of a fellow human in suffering. "Matthew, I don't have adequate words to express my gratitude for what you did for me. You literally brought me back from death when I had completely given up on everything," said Robert, his voice choked with genuine emotion. The young man lowered his eyes modestly, clearly uncomfortable with praise and recognition, demonstrating a natural humility that was rare in modern times of constant self-promotion. He explained that he had arrived early that morning to perform pool maintenance, as he had done every week for approximately 6 months, since he had been informally hired by one of the mansion's former employees. When he noticed that the office lights were on and heard a strange sound coming from there, he decided to investigate out of genuine concern for the owner's well-being. Finding Robert unconscious had been a terrible shock, but his first reaction was to act quickly to save a human life, without thinking about possible consequences or complications that might arise. Throughout the wait at the hospital, he had prayed silently for Robert to recover completely, even without knowing him personally. Any decent person would have done the same thing, Mr. Robert. I can't imagine simply ignoring someone in danger and going on with my life as if nothing had happened. Human life is too sacred to be neglected, Matthew responded with touching simplicity. Robert observed the young man carefully as he spoke, noticing details that revealed much about his character and personal circumstances. Matthew wore simple but impeccably clean clothes, worn but well cared for shoes, and carried his belongings in a canvas backpack that had seen better days. Despite the obvious financial limitations, there was a natural dignity in his posture and an evident education in his manner of speaking that suggested a solid family upbringing based on strong moral values. His hands, though calloused from manual labor, were careful and precise in every movement, demonstrating professional pride in his honest work. When he smiled, which happened frequently during the conversation, his entire face lit up with a genuine joy that Robert hadn't seen in anyone around him for years. "You've been working here for 6 months, and I didn't even know of your existence. What kind of negligent employer have I become, living isolated in my own house like a ghost?" Robert reflected with a pang of guilt and regret. Matthew explained that he had been informally hired by the former head gardener to help with the pool maintenance and other aquatic tasks on the property. He didn't have a formal contract or worker benefits, receiving only a weekly cash payment that barely covered his basic survival needs. He lived in a small rented apartment downtown, sharing expenses with 2 other young men who also worked in general services for wealthy family homes. Despite the evident financial difficulties, he spoke about his life with serene acceptance and even gratitude for the opportunities he had, demonstrating impressive emotional maturity for someone so young. He mentioned that he had grown up in an orphanage after losing his parents in an accident when he was a child, but showed no bitterness or resentment for this traumatic experience. "I learned early on that complaining about life doesn't change anything, Mr. Robert. It's better to focus on what we can do with the circumstances we have and try to help other people whenever possible," said Matthew, with a wisdom that deeply surprised Robert. Robert felt deeply touched by Matthew's personal story and the positive perspective that the young man maintained despite all the adversities he had faced. He decided at that moment that he could not allow someone with such kindness and character to continue working in precarious and uncertain conditions. He proposed to immediately formalize Matthew's employment situation, offering him a formal contract with a dignified salary, adequate benefits, and most importantly, free accommodation on the property itself. There were several empty rooms in the staff wing of the mansion that could be prepared to comfortably accommodate Matthew, allowing him to save rent money and have more financial stability. The offer surprised Matthew, who initially hesitated to accept such generosity from someone he barely knew personally. "I cannot accept such kindness from you, Mr. Robert. I only did what any person should do, and you are offering me much more than I deserve. I don't want you to think I saved your life expecting some reward," Matthew protested, with touching honesty. Robert insisted that his offer was not motivated by gratitude or obligation, but rather by the recognition that Matthew was exactly the kind of honest and trustworthy person he needed around him during this difficult time in his life. He explained that he had dismissed all other employees due to financial issues, but that he could maintain at least one employee if he reorganized his priorities and cut unnecessary expenses. Moreover, he confessed that the prospect of continuing to live completely alone in the huge mansion terrified him, especially after the suicide attempt that had demonstrated how dangerous total isolation could be. Having Matthew living on the property would provide not only human companionship, but also the security of knowing someone would be nearby in case of medical or emotional emergency. "I need someone like you around, Matthew. Someone with a kind heart who reminds me that there is still kindness in this cruel and dark world," Robert admitted with rare vulnerability. After much dialogue and persuasion, Matthew finally agreed to accept the generous offer, but only on the condition that he would continue working diligently to deserve the trust and generosity that Robert was showing. They arranged that Matthew would move into the mansion at the end of that week, after organizing his personal belongings and notifying his roommates about his change of address. Robert felt a strange satisfaction in making these practical arrangements, as if he were gradually recovering the ability to care for someone besides himself. It was the first time in years that he had made a decision that was not related to searching for Mike or to his own suffering, but rather to the well-being of another person who deserved a better opportunity in life. "It will be a pleasure to have you living here, Matthew. This house urgently needs young and positive energy to drive away the ghosts of the past that haunt me," said Robert, with a genuine smile that hadn't appeared on his face in a long time. The following days passed quickly as Robert and Matthew organized the practical details of the new housing and work situation. The room chosen for Matthew was on the ground floor of the east wing of the mansion, overlooking the garden and with direct access to the pool area, facilitating his daily work. Robert insisted on completely furnishing the room with a new bed, wardrobe, desk, and even a small television, wanting to ensure that Matthew felt truly welcome and comfortable in his new home. During this preparation period, the two men spent several hours talking about various subjects, from literature and music to life philosophy and personal experiences, gradually developing a friendship based on mutual respect and genuine affinity. "It's amazing how you can find positive aspects in any situation, Matthew. That ability to see beauty where others see only problems is a rare and precious gift," Robert commented during one of their evening conversations. On the first night that Matthew officially slept in the mansion, Robert felt a tranquility he had not experienced in years. Knowing there was another person in the house, someone he could trust and who genuinely cared about his well-being, relieved a chronic anxiety that he didn't even realize he had been carrying. After the simple dinner they had prepared together in the kitchen, each retired to their respective rooms. But Robert remained awake for some time, simply appreciating the distant sound of Matthew moving about in his room, organizing his belongings and settling into his new environment. It was comforting to know he was no longer completely alone in that mansion, full of painful memories and deafening silences. "For the first time in 15 years, I don't feel that I am completely alone in this world. Perhaps there is still hope for this old wounded heart," thought Robert as he prepared for bed. Around midnight, Robert got up to drink a glass of water in the kitchen, a habit developed after years of chronic insomnia caused by recurring nightmares about Mike. As he passed through the hallway leading to Matthew's room, he noticed that a sliver of light still escaped from under the door, indicating that the young man was also awake on his first night in the new residence. Out of natural curiosity, and also due to a paternal concern that was beginning to awaken, Robert silently approached the partially open door, wanting to check if Matthew was doing well and adapting adequately to the new environment. What he saw through the door crack left him completely paralyzed, as if he had received a high-voltage electric shock. "This cannot be true. My eyes must be playing a cruel trick on me, after so many years of suffering and frustrated hope," he whispered to himself, feeling his heart dangerously accelerate. Matthew was sitting on the edge of the bed, with his back to the door, carefully removing a silver ring from his finger before placing it on the bedside table. Even from a distance, and with the dim lighting of the lamp, Robert could clearly distinguish the characteristic shape and shine of that ring. It was identical, absolutely identical to the silver ring he had given Mike on his 8th birthday, just days before the disappearance that had shattered his life. The same delicate design engraved on the surface, the same size, the same silver color that shone under the artificial light. Robert grabbed onto the doorframe to avoid fainting, feeling his legs weaken as if the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. His hands trembled violently as he watched Matthew carefully store the ring in the bedside table drawer, exactly as Mike used to do before going to sleep. My God, that ring! It's impossible that it's just a coincidence. After all these years searching, could Mike be right here in front of me? Morning arrived with a cruel clarity that penetrated through the curtains of Robert's room like sharp knives, preventing him from continuing to pretend that the previous night had been just an elaborate nightmare. He had spent the remaining hours of dawn pacing back and forth in his room, obsessively reliving the image of the silver ring that Matthew had removed from his finger before sleeping. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw again that object shining under the lamplight, identical in every detail to the gift he had given Mike on the last birthday they celebrated together. His hands trembled uncontrollably as he held the faded photograph of his son, mentally comparing the features of the 8-year-old boy with those of the 25-year-old young man who now slept just a few meters away. The possibility forming in his mind was as impossible as it was desperately desired, creating a whirlwind of contradictory emotions that threatened to explode his already wounded chest. If Matthew really is my Mike, how will I manage to control this overwhelming emotion without scaring him? How can I approach such a delicate subject without seeming completely crazy? He questioned himself, watching the rising sun paint the garden with golden tones. Robert dressed with special care that morning, choosing casual clothes that would not intimidate Matthew during the crucial conversation he needed to have. He checked his appearance in the mirror multiple times, trying to disguise the evident signs of a sleepless night and the emotional turmoil consuming him from within. He mentally rehearsed different ways to approach the subject of the ring, seeking words that would sound natural and not desperate or suspicious. He needed to be strategic and careful, as a wrong approach could frighten Matthew and destroy any possibility of discovering the truth about his identity. He descended the stairs with measured steps, his heart beating so strongly that he was certain the sound echoed through the silent corridors of the mansion. Through the wide windows, he could see Matthew already diligently working in the pool area, his simple clothes contrasting with the opulence of the perfectly maintained gardens around him. I need to stay calm and act naturally, even if my heart is about to explode with anxiety and hope, he murmured to himself, taking a deep breath before stepping out into the garden. Matthew was focused on the meticulous cleaning of the pool, using a long-handled net to remove leaves and debris that had fallen during the windy night. His movements were precise and careful, demonstrating the professional pride that characterized his approach to honest work. The morning sun illuminated his light brown hair, creating golden reflections that painfully reminded Robert of Mike's hair as a child. When he noticed Robert approaching, Matthew immediately straightened up and offered his usual warm smile, wiping his wet hands on the towel he always carried on his shoulder. There was something in Matthew's facial expression, in the way his eyes lit up when seeing Robert, that awakened a disturbing familiarity in the older man's heart. It was like looking into a mirror of time, seeing echoes of features he knew intimately, but that had been lost through 15 years of forced separation. "Good morning, Mr. Robert. I hope you managed to rest well on your first night with company in the mansion." "I slept better than I have in months, feeling truly safe and at home for the first time in a long time," said Matthew, radiating a genuine gratitude that deeply touched Robert's heart. Robert approached slowly, trying to control the tremor in his hands and the acceleration of his heart that threatened to betray his altered emotional state. He discreetly observed Matthew's hands as the young man worked, noticing that the silver ring was again on his finger, softly gleaming under the natural daylight. The sight of that familiar object made his legs tremble slightly, and he needed to discreetly lean on the stone parapet surrounding the pool area to maintain balance. Every fiber of his being screamed that this was Mike's ring, but his rational mind fought against this impossible conclusion, reminding him that it could just be a cruel coincidence of fate. He needed to discover the truth, but knew he needed to be extremely careful in his approach so as not to destroy the trust he had built with Matthew over the past few days. "Matthew, I need to ask a question that might seem strange, but it's very important to me. Would you mind telling me about that ring you always wear? Does it have any special meaning to you?" Robert asked, his voice slightly betraying the emotion he was trying to control. Matthew immediately stopped his work and looked at the ring on his finger, slowly rotating it while a thoughtful and melancholic expression crossed his young face. Robert realized he had touched on something deeply personal and significant for the young man, as his eyes filled with an ancient sadness that contrasted with his habitually optimistic personality. The young man sat on the edge of the pool, gesturing for Robert to do the same, as if preparing to share a story he rarely told others. There was a vulnerability in his posture that painfully reminded Robert of how Mike used to behave when he was about to reveal something important or make a difficult confession. Robert's heart accelerated even more, sensing that he was about to hear information that could completely change his life and confirm his wildest suspicions. "This ring is practically the only connection I have to my past, Mr. Robert. It's a long and somewhat sad story, But if you really want to know, I'm happy to share the few details I've managed to gather over the years," responded Matthew, his voice laden with a deep nostalgia that touched Robert's soul. Matthew began to tell his story in a low and emotional voice, revealing details that made Robert's heart dangerously accelerate with each word pronounced. He explained that his first conscious memories dated from when he was approximately 10 or 11 years old, waking up in a municipal hospital without any memory of how he had gotten there or who his parents were. The doctors had diagnosed traumatic amnesia, probably caused by some terrible event that his childish mind had blocked as a psychological protection mechanism. For weeks, social workers tried to identify him through records of missing children, but never managed to find any match with his appearance or physical description. The only personal object he possessed when he was found was exactly this silver ring, firmly grasped in his small hand, as if it were the only anchor connecting him to a past lost in the mists of fragmented memory. "The doctors said that I refused to let go of this ring, even when I was unconscious. It was as if my mind instinctively knew it was too important to be lost, even when I couldn't remember why," explained Matthew, nervously rotating the ring as he spoke. Robert struggled to maintain his composure as he absorbed every detail of Matthew's narrative, but internally he felt as if he were being struck by successive bolts of recognition and desperate hope. The age Matthew had when he was found corresponded exactly to the period of Mike's disappearance, and traumatic amnesia would perfectly explain why the young man couldn't remember his previous life or his biological family. His hands shook violently when Matthew mentioned having been found firmly holding the ring, as he vividly remembered how Mike adored that gift and swore never to take it off his finger, promising to wear it forever as a symbol of the love between father and son. The probability of two different children having absolutely identical rings and disappearing in the same period was mathematically impossible, but Robert forced himself to continue listening before drawing definitive conclusions that might be influenced by his desperate desire to find his lost son. "My God, every detail of this story fits perfectly with Mike's disappearance. Could it be possible that my son is sitting here beside me after all these years of fruitless searching?" thought Robert, struggling to control the tears that threatened to escape from his eyes. Matthew continued his narrative, explaining that after months in the hospital with no one claiming him, he was transferred to a municipal orphanage where he grew up surrounded by other abandoned or orphaned children. He described how he had desperately tried to recover his lost memories during adolescence, visiting all the places where children were usually found in the hope that something would awaken dormant memories. During one of these investigative journeys at 16, he had returned to the exact location where he was initially found, a dumpster near an abandoned orphanage on the outskirts of the city. The place was in ruins, overtaken by wild vegetation, and frequented only by homeless people and those in situations of extreme social vulnerability. It was there, rummaging through the rubble and accumulated debris, that he found other objects that seemed to have some mysterious connection to his lost past, although he could never identify exactly what that connection was or why he felt a strange familiarity with those seemingly worthless objects. "I spent years returning to that cursed place, hoping that something would awaken my memories. I found broken toys, deteriorated clothes, and other personal objects that someone had discarded, but I never managed to connect anything with my lost identity," Matthew said with evident sadness in his voice. Robert absorbed this information with an electric shock that ran through his entire body, as he immediately recognized the description of the location Matthew had mentioned. That abandoned orphanage was only a few kilometers from the mansion, and Robert remembered visiting it several times during the first years of searching for Mike, interrogating former employees and scouring old records in the hope of finding any clue about his son's whereabouts. The geographical proximity was not a coincidence. It was exactly the direction Mike had taken on the night of his disappearance, following a path that would inevitably lead him to that peripheral region of the city. The fact that Matthew had been found in that specific area, wearing Mike's ring and at the correct age, created a convergence of evidence that was impossible to ignore or attribute to chance. Robert felt his legs weaken again, and he had to hold firmly onto the stone parapet to avoid fainting with the intensity of the revelation forming in his mind. Mike must have gotten lost in that region and ended up injured or traumatized somehow. That's why he developed amnesia and could never return home or remember who he was, Robert concluded mentally, feeling an explosive mixture of joy and sadness. Matthew noticed Robert's sudden pallor and the way his hands trembled uncontrollably, interpreting these signs as a possible relapse of the depressive state that had motivated the suicide attempt days before. He immediately abandoned his personal narrative and approached Robert with genuine concern, offering physical and emotional support with the naturalness of someone who genuinely cared about the well-being of a loved one. He suggested that Robert sit in the shade and brought a glass of fresh water from the kitchen, demonstrating the same attentive care he had shown on the morning he saved the older man's life. There was something deeply familiar in the way Matthew cared for Robert, an instinctive tenderness that went beyond professional gratitude or natural kindness, as if there were a deep emotional connection that transcended the rational consciousness of both. "Mr. Robert, are you feeling well? Perhaps I should call Dr. Johnson to examine you." "I don't want my story to have disturbed you in any way," said Matthew, his voice laden with genuine concern. Robert struggled to regain his composure, knowing he needed to continue the conversation despite the emotional turmoil consuming him internally. He assured Matthew that he was fine, explaining that the story had touched his heart deeply because he himself had lost a child years ago and understood the pain of not having family memories or connections to the past. He asked Matthew to continue his narrative, promising that he would better control his emotions and not let himself be shaken again by the intensity of feelings the story evoked. Internally, Robert was developing a careful plan to gradually reveal his suspicions to Matthew, but he knew he needed to be extremely delicate to avoid shocking or frightening the young man with a revelation as impossible as it was wonderful. First, he needed to hear the entire story and gather all possible evidence before sharing his own devastating conclusions. "Please, continue telling me about your journey, Matthew. I promise I'll be able to control my emotions." "Your story is very important to me, more than you can imagine," Robert asked, his voice trembling slightly with contained emotion. Matthew hesitated for a moment, clearly concerned about the emotional impact his narrative was having on Robert, but finally decided to continue when he saw the determination in the older man's eyes. He explained that after turning 18 and officially leaving the orphanage system, he had spent some years living on the streets, doing sporadic jobs and struggling to survive in a society that offered few opportunities for young people without family or formal education. During this difficult period, he had met Claire, a young woman a few years older who had also grown up in the orphanage system and who had become like an older sister to him. Claire had secured a stable job as a nurse in a public hospital and insisted that Matthew come live with her in a small apartment they rented together. It was Claire who encouraged him to seek honest work and try to rebuild his life, despite the absence of memories about his past, and it was also she who helped him develop the positive and resilient perspective that characterized his current personality. "Claire was the family I chose for myself, Mr. Robert. She taught me that we don't need memories of the past to build a meaningful future. Without her, I would probably have given up on everything a long time ago," said Matthew with evident gratitude, his eyes shining with genuine affection. Robert felt a pang of irrational jealousy, hearing Matthew speak so fondly about Claire, but immediately censured himself for this selfish and inappropriate feeling. If Matthew really was Mike, then Claire had done exactly what Robert should have done: protect, care for, and unconditionally love a child who needed family. Instead of resentment, Robert should feel eternal gratitude for this woman who had given his lost son the love and care that he himself had failed to offer during all these years of forced separation. He asked for more details about Claire, wanting to better know the person who had been instrumental in forming the admirable character that Matthew demonstrated in all his actions and words. The more he heard about the relationship between the two young people, the more Robert became convinced that Claire was an exceptional person who deserved his respect and gratitude, not his rivalry or paternal jealousy. "I would very much like to meet this Claire who was so important in your life, Matthew. Anyone who cared for you with such affection deserves my admiration and eternal gratitude," said Robert sincerely, controlling his conflicting emotions. Matthew was about to respond when the sound of tires screeching abruptly at the property entrance cut through the morning air like an emergency alarm. A small and visibly old car, stopped suddenly in front of the mansion, raising a cloud of dust that slowly dispersed in the still morning air. The driver's door opened violently, and a young woman jumped out of the vehicle with desperate and uncoordinated movements, clearly in a state of extreme panic. It was Claire, recognizable from the physical description Matthew had given earlier. Dark hair tied in a messy ponytail, wrinkled nurse's uniform as if she had slept in it, and red eyes swollen from recent tears. She ran toward the pool area with staggering steps, calling Matthew's name with a strident voice that revealed absolute terror. His disheveled appearance and desperate expression contrasted drastically with the tranquility of the sunny morning, creating an atmosphere of emergency that made Robert's stomach tighten with instant apprehension. "Matthew! Matthew, where are you?" "I need to speak with you immediately. It's an emergency," shouted Claire, her voice breaking with emotion, while frantically searching for the young man. Matthew rose immediately upon hearing Claire's voice, his expression instantly changing from tranquility to deep concern as he noticed the altered state of the young woman he considered his sister. Robert observed the interaction between the two with complete attention, noting how Matthew instinctively ran to embrace Claire and offer comfort even before knowing what problem had brought her there in such a state of despair. The emotional connection between them was evident and touching, demonstrating years of mutual care and unconditional support that transcended blood ties. Claire clung to Matthew as if he were her only anchor amid a devastating storm, sobbing uncontrollably against his shoulder while trying to catch enough breath to explain the reason for her urgent visit. Robert remained discreetly apart, but close enough to hear the conversation, sensing that he was about to receive news that would drastically change the course of events that were beginning to unfold. "Claire, what happened? You're scaring me with all this desperation. Take a deep breath and tell me what's going on," said Matthew, gently holding the young woman's shoulders to calm her. Claire struggled to control her broken breathing and wipe away the tears that continued to run down her pale cheeks before managing to articulate the words she had rehearsed during the desperate journey to the mansion. Her hands trembled violently as she removed some crumpled papers from her uniform pocket, medical documents she had kept with extreme care despite her altered emotional state. Robert realized they were medical tests and hospital reports, and his heart began to race with the apprehension that Matthew might be facing some serious health problem. The expression on Claire's face was that of someone who had just received the worst possible news, and the way she looked at Matthew was charged with a desperate and protective love that recognized the imminent possibility of loss. Robert felt a pang of familiar terror, painfully remembering how he had felt on the night he realized Mike had disappeared, when the entire world seemed to collapse in a matter of seconds. "Matthew, I received the results of your routine tests we did last week. There's something very serious I need to tell you, and there's no time to soften the news," said Claire, her voice trembling with the difficulty of pronouncing such devastating words. Claire revealed that the routine medical tests Matthew had done as part of the procedures to get a new job had detected a serious heart abnormality that required immediate surgical intervention. The cardiologists at the hospital where she worked had confirmed the diagnosis through multiple complementary exams, unanimously concluding that Matthew suffered from a rare congenital condition that had remained asymptomatic for years, but now threatened his life imminently. The necessary surgery was extremely complex and costly, requiring a specialized team and high-tech equipment that were only available in top-tier private hospitals. Without urgent surgical intervention, doctors estimated that Matthew would have at most 48 hours before his condition deteriorated irreversibly, resulting in sudden death from cardiac arrest. Claire had spent the entire night trying to find ways to finance the surgery, but the astronomical cost was completely beyond her financial possibilities, even if she sold all her personal belongings. The doctors were very clear, "Matthew. If you don't have this surgery within 48 hours, you'll die. The cost is $200,000, and I've already tried all possible resources," said Claire through tears, handing over the medical papers with trembling hands. Robert felt as if he had been struck by a devastating lightning bolt upon hearing these terrible words coming from Claire's mouth. The possibility that Matthew could actually be Mike, combined with the imminent threat of losing him again before even confirming his suspicions, created a perfect emotional storm that threatened to completely destroy his already fragile mental sanity. His legs weakened, and he had to lean heavily on the stone parapet, feeling the world spinning around him like an out-of-control carousel. The cruel irony of the situation did not go unnoticed. After 15 years desperately searching for Mike, he had possibly found him only to discover that he might lose him again in a matter of hours. The universe seemed to be mocking him with a sadistic cruelty that surpassed all previous suffering he had endured during his journey through the personal hell of loss and fruitless searching. I cannot lose my son again, especially now that there is a real chance I've found him. I will do whatever necessary to save Matthew's life, even if it means spending my last financial resources, Robert thought with fierce determination rising in his chest. Robert did not hesitate for even a second upon the devastating revelation that Claire had just made about Matthew's critical heart condition. His hands, which moments before trembled with nervousness and contained emotion, now moved with iron determination as he pulled his cell phone from his pocket to make the necessary calls that would save the life of the young man who possibly was his lost son. The transformation in his posture was instantaneous and impressive. From a man broken by pain and uncertainty, Robert converted back into the decisive and efficient businessman who had once built a financial empire through quick decisions and determined actions. He immediately called his personal lawyer, instructing him to transfer $250,000 from his emergency reserves to the account of the most renowned hospital in the city, ensuring not only the cost of the surgery, but also all post-operative care that Matthew might need. His voice was firm and authoritative, not allowing questions or bureaucratic delays that could compromise the precious time they had available. Claire, you can rest assured because I will take care of all the costs of Matthew's surgery. I will not accept any discussion about this, as I consider it my moral responsibility to help someone who saved my own life, Robert declared with a determination that surprised both Claire and Matthew himself. Claire initially tried to protest against Robert's extreme generosity, arguing that she could not accept such financial help from someone she barely knew and who had no obligation to take on such costly medical responsibilities. Her tears of despair transformed into tears of overwhelming gratitude, but she still insisted that she would find a way to reimburse Robert for the expenses as soon as she could organize her personal finances. Matthew also tried to intervene, saying he did not feel comfortable accepting such generosity without being able to adequately reciprocate, but Robert cut off all objections with firm gestures and definitive words. He explained that he had lost a son years ago, and that helping Matthew was a way to honor Mike's memory, as well as to repay the favor the young man had done by saving him from death by overdose a few days earlier. His justification was simultaneously truthful and strategic, as it did not yet reveal his suspicions about Matthew's true identity, but established a solid emotional basis for his generous financial intervention. I don't want to hear another word about reimbursements or financial obligations. You two are people too good for me to allow something terrible to happen due to lack of monetary resources, Robert insisted, definitively ending any discussion on the matter. The trip to the hospital was a desperate race against time, with Robert driving his luxury car at maximum permitted speed, while Claire and Matthew followed right behind in her simple vehicle. Throughout the journey, Robert couldn't stop thinking about the cruel irony of fate that had put Matthew at risk of death exactly at the moment when he was beginning to suspect that the young man might be Mike. His hands gripped the steering wheel with excessive force, trying to maintain control over the car and over his emotions that violently oscillated between desperate hope and absolute terror of a new, irreparable loss. The city traffic seemed to conspire against them, with each red light and each traffic jam representing precious seconds that could make the difference between life and death. Robert drove with the expertise of someone who had learned to navigate the city streets during years of fruitless searching for Mike, knowing every shortcut and every alternative route that could save crucial minutes in reaching the hospital. When they finally arrived at the parking lot of the medical institution, Robert jumped out of the car before even completely turning off the engine, running toward the reception with an urgency he hadn't shown in years. Every second counts now, and I cannot allow hospital bureaucracies to delay the care Matthew needs. I will use all my influence to ensure he receives the best possible treatment, thought Robert while running through the hospital corridors. The hospital reception transformed into a theater of medical efficiency. As soon as Robert presented Matthew's exams and confirmed he would assume all treatment costs without financial limitations, the administrative staff, initially skeptical about the payment capacity for such an expensive surgery, quickly changed their attitude when Robert provided his banking information and authorized immediate verification of his available funds. In a matter of minutes, a specialized medical team was mobilized. Operating rooms were prepared and all necessary equipment was checked and calibrated for the operation that would save Matthew's life. Claire observed all this mobilization with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief, never having seen the hospital system work with such speed and efficiency when it came to patients without expensive medical insurance. Matthew was immediately taken for additional preoperative exams, while Robert filled out mountains of administrative paperwork, officially assuming full financial responsibility for the medical treatment. "I never thought I would see such generosity from a stranger, Mr. Robert. You are literally saving the life of the most important person in the world to me," said Claire, her voice choked with overwhelming emotion. While Matthew was being prepared for emergency heart surgery, Robert and Claire settled in the waiting room of the surgical center. A sterilized environment with uncomfortable chairs, cold fluorescent lighting, and the characteristic smell of hospital disinfectants that penetrated the nostrils as a constant reminder of the gravity of the situation. The bare white walls were decorated only with a few generic pictures of tranquil landscapes, clearly chosen to convey a sense of calm that drastically contrasted with the anxiety consuming the families and friends of patients in surgery. Robert nervously paced back and forth, unable to remain seated for more than a few minutes, while Claire remained hunched in one of the chairs, firmly holding Matthew's medical exams as if they were sacred relics. The silence between them was heavy and loaded with tension, broken only by the distant sound of medical equipment and muffled conversations of nurses passing through adjacent corridors. Robert knew this was the perfect moment to discover more details about Matthew's personal history through Claire, but he needed to be extremely careful not to prematurely reveal his suspicions about the young man's true identity. "Claire, while we wait for news about the surgery, would you mind telling me more about how you met Matthew? I'd like to better understand the story of you two," asked Robert, finally sitting down beside her. Claire raised her red and tear-swollen eyes, studying Robert's face with an expression that mixed gratitude, curiosity, and slight distrust about the motivations behind such financial generosity. After a few moments of hesitation, she began to tell her personal story, explaining that she had grown up in the same municipal orphanage where Matthew arrived years later under mysterious and traumatic circumstances. She described how the boy was when brought by social workers, too thin for his apparent age, with dirty and torn clothes, completely mute due to the psychological trauma he had suffered, and desperately clinging to a silver ring that he refused to let go of even during meals or sleep. The orphanage caregivers had tried multiple approaches to make the boy speak or remember details about his previous life, including sessions with psychologists specialized in childhood trauma, but Matthew remained in total silence for almost 2 years after his arrival at the institution. Claire, who at the time was 12 years old and already demonstrated developed maternal instincts, naturally assumed the role of protector and caregiver for the traumatized boy, gradually teaching him to trust other people again and to find safety in the orphanage environment. Matthew was like a little ghost when he arrived at the orphanage, Mr. Robert. He didn't speak, didn't play, just sat in a corner holding that silver ring and staring into nothingness. "It took years for him to become a normal child again," reported Claire, her voice laden with maternal tenderness. Robert absorbed every word of Claire's narrative with obsessive attention, mentally cataloguing each detail that perfectly matched the circumstances of Mike's disappearance and the physical and emotional characteristics his son had demonstrated in childhood. The description of Matthew clinging to the silver ring was especially significant, as Robert vividly remembered how Mike had reacted when he received that gift, solemnly promising that he would never take it off his finger because it represented the eternal love between father and son. The severe psychological trauma that had caused temporary mutism also fit perfectly with what Robert imagined Mike would have experienced after getting lost and being exposed to the dangerous city streets for days or weeks. Matthew's approximate age when he arrived at the orphanage, his physical appearance described by Claire, and even his gentle and resilient personality were consistent with the characteristics Mike had demonstrated during his first 8 years of life. Robert struggled to maintain his external composure, while internally feeling a growing certainty that he was finally discovering what had happened to his lost son during all those years of desperate and fruitless searching. Claire, you said Matthew couldn't remember anything about his life before arriving at the orphanage. Did he never recover any memories, not even fragments or dreams about his biological family? Robert asked, trying to keep his voice neutral despite the emotion threatening to overflow. Claire explained that over the years, especially during adolescence, Matthew had experienced occasional episodes where confused fragments of memories seemed to emerge from his subconscious, usually in the form of vivid dreams or sensations of déjà vu in certain specific situations. She mentioned that he sometimes woke up crying after dreaming of a gray-haired man who called him by name, but could never remember specific details about the appearance or identity of this father figure who appeared in his dreams. Claire also revealed that Matthew had an inexplicable aversion to certain sounds, especially doorbell rings and ringing phones, which left him visibly agitated and anxious without being able to explain the reason for this intense emotional reaction. During adolescence, he had developed the habit of compulsively drawing plants and gardens, creating detailed landscapes from memory that seemed to represent a specific place he couldn't consciously identify. These drawings were always the same: a large house with extensive gardens, leafy trees, and a blue pool surrounded by natural stones, exactly like the property where Robert currently lived. His drawings were always the same, Mr. Robert, an elegant mansion with huge gardens and a beautiful pool. I always thought it was a product of imagination, but now that I'm seeing your property, I realize they are practically identical, Claire observed, with an expression of growing surprise. Robert felt a shiver run down his spine upon hearing this revelation about Matthew's drawings, as it definitely confirmed that the young man had subconscious memories of the mansion where he had lived during the first 8 years of his life. The detailed description Claire gave of the drawings corresponded exactly to the appearance of the family property, including specific elements such as the arrangement of trees, the shape of the pool, and even the distinctive architecture of the main house. Robert discreetly removed his cell phone and showed Claire some old photographs of the mansion that he kept saved in the device's memory, observing her reaction of absolute shock as she immediately recognized the perfect correspondence between the real images and the compulsive drawings Matthew had made for years. The expression on Claire's face gradually changed from initial surprise to a growing understanding that there was something much deeper and more significant in the connection between Robert and Matthew than simply the gratitude of a man saved by a good Samaritan. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the phone to examine the photographs more closely, and Robert realized she was beginning to mentally connect all the pieces of the puzzle that he himself had assembled over the past 24 hours. Mr. Robert, these photographs are exactly like the drawings Matthew made when he was a teenager. How is this possible? What is happening here? Claire asked, her voice revealing a mixture of confusion and growing suspicion. Robert realized that the crucial moment had come to reveal his suspicions to Claire, but he knew he needed to do this gradually and with extreme caution so as not to shock her excessively or create false hopes that might prove unfounded. He began by explaining his own story of loss, telling in detail about Mike's disappearance 15 years ago and the subsequent years of desperate searching that had consumed his fortune and shattered his mental and emotional health. He described how Mike had disappeared at exactly the same time Matthew had been found in a confused state, how the age matched perfectly, and how the silver ring Matthew wore was identical to the gift he had given Mike a few days before his disappearance. Claire listened to every word with increasing attention, her eyes gradually widening as she understood the devastating implications of what Robert was suggesting. The possibility that Matthew could be Robert's lost son was not just an extraordinary coincidence, but would also mean that she had spent years caring for and loving another man's son without ever knowing his true identity or family origin. I'm beginning to believe that Matthew may be my son Mike, Claire. The evidence is simply too much to be coincidence. The age, the ring, the drawings, the place where he was found, Everything fits perfectly, Robert revealed, carefully observing her reaction. Claire absorbed this revelation with a complexity of emotions that included shock, disbelief, a pang of anticipated loss, and, surprisingly, a sense of relief at finally understanding the mysteries that had surrounded Matthew throughout his life. She had always questioned the circumstances of the trauma that had caused Matthew's amnesia, and Robert's explanation finally offered logical answers to all the inexplicable behaviors and characteristics she had observed in the young man over the years. At the same time, Claire experienced a conflicting mixture of happiness that Matthew might potentially reunite with his biological family and a selfish sadness at the possibility of losing him to a life she could never offer due to her socioeconomic limitations. She asked Robert how he planned to confirm his suspicions and what would happen to the relationship she and Matthew had built over the years if his theories proved correct. There was a genuine vulnerability in her voice that revealed the fear of being abandoned by the only family she had known, but also a generosity of spirit that made her genuinely wish for Matthew's happiness above her own personal interests. "If Matthew really is your son, Mr. Robert, I'm happy for him to finally have found his true family. But I need you to know that he will always be my brother, regardless of blood ties," Claire said with touching dignity. Robert was deeply moved by the generosity and nobility of character that Claire demonstrated upon receiving this potentially devastating revelation. He immediately assured her that, should his suspicions be confirmed, he would never try to separate Claire from Matthew or diminish the importance of the fraternal relationship they had built over the years. He explained that Claire had done exactly what he himself should have done: protect, love, and care for Mike when he most needed a family, and that for this she would always deserve his eternal gratitude and a special place in both their lives. Robert proposed that, regardless of the results of the paternity tests he planned to request, he would like to consider Claire as part of his expanded family, offering her financial support to complete her nursing studies and ensure that she never again faced economic difficulties. His offer was sincere and generous, motivated both by genuine gratitude and by the desire to build bridges instead of walls between all the people who loved Matthew. Claire cried silently upon hearing these words, understanding that Robert was a fundamentally kind man who had been shattered by the loss of his son, but who still maintained the capacity to love and care for others. "Claire, if Matthew is really my Mike, then you are the extraordinary woman who saved my son when I failed to protect him. That makes you a heroine in my personal story," Robert said with moving sincerity. The hours dragged slowly in the waiting room, each minute seeming like an eternity, as Robert and Claire waited for news about the progress of Matthew's heart surgery. Robert had obtained information from the nurses that the operation was extremely complex and could last between 6 to 8 hours, depending on the complications that arose during the procedure. Claire used this time to share more details about Matthew's personality and habits, describing his natural kindness, his exemplary work ethic, his tendency to help people in need even when he himself faced financial difficulties, and his impressive ability to find positive aspects in the most adverse situations. Robert recognized in each description the same characteristics that Mike had demonstrated during childhood, especially the instinctive compassion for people and animals in suffering. Claire also mentioned that Matthew had an impressive photographic memory for faces and places, being able to remember specific details about people he had met only once, years ago. This special cognitive ability had allowed him to be very efficient in jobs requiring attention to detail, but had also made more frustrating his inability to remember anything about his own childhood and family origin. Matthew always said he had the feeling of looking for something or someone important, but could never identify exactly what it was. "Now I understand that he was unconsciously searching for his real family," reflected Claire with a new and painful understanding. During the long wait, Robert also shared with Claire detailed memories about Mike's personality as a child, describing his interests, fears, joys, and behavioral peculiarities that could help confirm or refute his suspicions about Matthew's identity. He mentioned how Mike had a special fascination with water and swimming, spending hours playing in the mansion's pool and dreaming of becoming a swimming instructor when he grew up. Claire confirmed that Matthew had always demonstrated exceptional aquatic abilities, managing to swim in complex technical styles without ever having received formal lessons, as if his body unconsciously remembered movements learned in early childhood. Robert also described how Mike had the habit of talking to himself when concentrating on an activity, creating imaginary dialogues that helped him process complex information and emotions. Claire laughed through tears when confirming that Matthew maintained exactly the same habit, especially when working in gardens or taking care of plants, whispering instructions to himself as if following mental recipes stored somewhere deep in his memory. Each correspondence between the descriptions of the two children strengthened Robert's conviction that he had finally found his lost son, but also intensified his anxiety about the outcome of the surgery that would determine whether they would have the opportunity to build a relationship based on this extraordinary discovery. The similarities are so many that they cannot be coincidence, Claire. I am absolutely certain that Matthew is my Mike, and now I just need him to survive this surgery so we can begin to rebuild our family, said Robert with a mixture of hope and terror. Approximately 7 hours after the start of the surgery, the door to the waiting room opened, and the surgeon responsible for the operation entered with tired but determined steps, slowly removing his surgical cap and wiping the sweat from his forehead with a sterilized towel. It was Dr. Martinez, a renowned cardiologist with decades of experience in complex surgeries, whose professional reputation had been one of the decisive factors in choosing the hospital for Matthew's treatment. His expression was serious and professional, revealing the weight of the responsibility of communicating medical results that could mean life or death for the young patient. Robert and Claire rose simultaneously from the chairs where they had spent the last hours in anxious vigil, their hearts dangerously accelerating as they tried to interpret the doctor's facial expressions for clues about the success or failure of the surgical procedure. Dr. Martinez observed both with experienced eyes that had witnessed thousands of similar conversations throughout his career, understanding the crucial importance of the words he was about to pronounce to two people who clearly deeply loved the young man who was under his medical care. The operation was a complete success, and Matthew is stable and out of immediate danger. We were able to completely correct the cardiac anomaly and expect a full recovery within a few weeks, announced Dr. Martinez, observing the immediate relief that flooded Robert and Claire's faces. Robert felt his legs weaken with the overwhelming relief that swept through his entire body like a wave of gratitude and pure happiness, needing to lean against the wall to avoid fainting from the intensity of the emotion that instantly consumed him. Claire collapsed in tears of joy and gratitude, covering her face with her hands while sobbing uncontrollably, releasing all the tension and fear that had accumulated during the long hours of agonizing waiting. Dr. Martinez allowed both of them to process the good news for a few moments, before continuing with additional information about the procedure and post-operative care that would be necessary. He explained that the surgery had been more complex than initially anticipated, requiring advanced techniques and multiple interventions to completely correct the congenital condition that threatened Matthew's life. During the procedure, the medical team had discovered that the cardiac anomaly was the result of a rare birth defect that had probably remained asymptomatic for years due to the excellent physical condition that Matthew maintained through constant manual work and regular aquatic activities. But during the preoperative exams and the surgery itself, we discovered some additional information that I consider important to share with you, continued Dr. Martinez, his expression becoming more serious and thoughtful. The doctor revealed that the extensive blood tests performed as part of the preoperative protocols had confirmed something he suspected based on the subtle physical differences he had observed between Claire and Matthew. They were definitely not biological siblings, confirming what Claire already suspected, but never had the financial means to officially verify through genetic testing. This information was not a surprise to either of them, as both always knew that their fraternal relationship was based on love and mutual care instead of blood ties, but the official scientific confirmation created a moment of reflection on the implications of this revelation for their personal identities and future relationship. More significantly, Dr. Martinez mentioned that during the patient's preparation for surgery, the medical team had discovered a very specific and distinctive birthmark on Matthew's left shoulder region, a mark that was not visible during routine medical examinations due to its location and subtle coloration, but had become evident when the area was completely shaved and sterilized for the surgical procedure. The operation was a success, but we discovered something during the examinations. This young man is not the lady's biological brother. And there's something else. He has a very specific birthmark. Robert felt the entire world stop for an eternal moment when Dr. Martinez mentioned the specific birthmark found on Matthew during surgery. His hands trembled violently as he removed from his jacket's inner pocket the worn photograph of Mike that he always carried with him, the same image he had held against his chest on the night he had tried to end his own life. The photograph clearly showed a small star-shaped mark on the boy's left shoulder, a distinctive feature that Robert had lovingly kissed thousands of times during baths and moments of paternal care in Mike's childhood. Dr. Martinez observed the image with growing attention, mentally comparing the details he had observed during surgical preparation with the mark visible in the old photograph. His professional expression gradually gave way to surprised understanding as he realized the extraordinary implications of the coincidence he was witnessing between the patient's birthmark and the child in the photograph that Robert held with trembling hands. "Dr. Martinez, this is a photograph of my son Mike who disappeared 15 years ago. The mark you found on Matthew is exactly the same as the one my son had in the same location, isn't it?" asked Robert, his voice breaking with the overwhelming emotion that threatened to explode in his chest. The experienced doctor carefully examined the photograph for several minutes, using his portable magnifying glass to analyze the details of the birthmark visible in the time-faded image. He confirmed that the correspondence was absolutely perfect. The irregular star shape, the precise location on the left shoulder, even the proportional size was identical to what he had observed on Matthew during the preparation for cardiac surgery. As a doctor with decades of experience, Dr. Martinez had seen thousands of birthmarks throughout his career and knew that the probability of two different people having absolutely identical marks in location and shape was astronomically small, practically impossible. The combination of the birthmark with all other circumstantial evidence that Robert had mentioned during the wait created a convincing case that Matthew was indeed Mike, the lost son who had been desperately searched for 15 years. Claire observed this entire revelation with a complex mixture of genuine joy for the extraordinary discovery and a growing sense of anticipated loss that began to form a painful knot in her stomach. "The match is perfect, Mr. Robert. In my medical experience, I can state with confidence that this young man is definitely the same person who appears in this photograph, just 15 years older," confirmed Dr. Martinez with the authority of an expert. Robert needed to lean against the hospital corridor wall to avoid fainting, with the official confirmation that his suspicions were correct and that he had finally found Mike after a decade and a half of desperate and fruitless searching. Tears of pure joy began to stream down his wrinkled cheeks, washing away years of pain, guilt, and despair that had accumulated in thick layers over his wounded soul. Claire, observing Robert's emotional transformation, felt her own heart breaking into contradictory pieces. One part genuinely happy that Matthew had finally found his biological family and answers to the mysteries of his past, and another part selfishly terrified by the possibility of losing the only family she had known to a life of privileges she could never offer. Dr. Martinez, understanding the emotional magnitude of the moment he was witnessing, gently suggested that Robert wait a few hours before revealing this discovery to Matthew, allowing the young man to adequately recover from anesthesia and surgical trauma before processing such impactful information about his true identity. "Dr. Martinez, I need to see my son immediately. 15 years of separation has already been too long, and I cannot wait even one more minute to be by his side again," declared Robert with an emotional urgency that admitted no medical arguments. After careful negotiations with the medical team about post-operative visit protocols, Robert was finally authorized to enter the recovery room where Matthew rested under the residual effects of anesthesia and pain medications. The environment was dominated by sophisticated medical equipment that constantly monitored the patient's vital signs, creating an electronic symphony of beeps and hums that confirmed the surgery had been successful and the repaired heart was functioning properly. Matthew was lying on the hospital bed looking pale but peaceful, his regular and deep breathing indicating he was in a restorative sleep necessary for recovery. Intravenous tubes administered essential medications and fluids, and carefully positioned bandages protected the surgical incision on his chest. Robert slowly approached the bed, observing every detail of the young man's face, who he now knew with absolute certainty to be his lost son, looking for physical similarities that 15 years of growth and maturity had molded over the childlike features he remembered so fondly. "My dear Mike, I've finally found you after all these years of desperate searching. Daddy is here now and will never let you go again," whispered Robert, gently touching Matthew's hand. Claire remained at the entrance of the room, silently observing the reunion between father and son, with conflicting emotions that created a devastating storm in her young heart. She saw Robert transformed by the joy of finding Mike, noticing how years of suffering seemed to melt from his features as he absorbed the reality that his search had finally ended successfully. At the same time, Claire felt a growing and terrifying loneliness as she understood that Matthew now had a rich and loving biological family that could offer him everything she had never been able to provide due to her socio-economic limitations. The fear of abandonment that had haunted her childhood in the orphanage returned with renewed strength, cruelly whispering that now that Matthew had found his true family, he would no longer need the adoptive sister who had cared for him during the years of poverty and uncertainty. Robert, completely absorbed in contemplating his recovered son, initially did not notice Claire's silent suffering, but gradually became aware of her tense presence at the door of the room. "Claire, please come in and properly meet my son, Mike. You are a fundamental part of his story and deserve to be here in this historic moment with us," invited Robert, gesturing for her to approach the bed. Matthew gradually began to wake up from the effects of anesthesia, his eyes slowly opening and blinking several times as he tried to focus his blurry vision on the unfamiliar hospital environment around him. Robert carefully leaned over the bed, positioning his face within Matthew's limited visual field so that he would be the first person the young man saw upon returning to consciousness. There was something deeply symbolic about this moment of visual reconnection between father and son, as if the 15 years of forced separation were officially ending through this direct eye contact. Matthew blinked confusedly for a few seconds, clearly disoriented by the residual effects of the medications, but gradually his expression became more focused as he recognized Robert's familiar face leaning over him. His first words were a hoarse whisper asking for water, but his eyes showed relief at seeing familiar and caring people by his side during this vulnerable moment of medical recovery. "Robert, Claire, what happened to me? Why am I in the hospital and feeling so confused and weak?" Matthew asked in a raspy voice, trying to orient himself to reality. Robert carefully explained about the emergency heart surgery that had saved Matthew's life, temporarily omitting the details about his discovery of the young man's true identity to avoid overwhelming him emotionally during the first moments of post-operative recovery. He assured Matthew that the operation had been completely successful, that his heart was now functioning perfectly, and that he could expect a full recovery within a few weeks with proper medical care and appropriate rest. Claire remained silently by the bedside, holding Matthew's free hand while Robert spoke, but her expression revealed a growing sadness that dramatically contrasted with the radiant joy emanating from the older man. Robert realized that he needed to delicately approach the subject of Matthew's identity, but wanted to do so in a way that honored the crucial role Claire had played in the young man's life during all those years of family separation. "Matthew, there's something very important I need to share with you, but first I want you to know that Claire will always be considered part of our family, regardless of what we discover about your past," Robert said, carefully preparing the emotional ground. Robert slowly removed the worn photograph of Mike from his pocket, holding it with reverent hands, as if it were a sacred relic that could finally fulfill its intended purpose. He briefly explained about losing his son 15 years ago, and how he had spent all these years desperately searching for any clue that might lead him back home. He showed the photograph to Matthew, gently pointing to the birthmark visible on the child's left shoulder, and explaining that Dr. Martinez had found an absolutely identical mark on Matthew during the preparation for surgery. The revelation was made with tenderness and care, allowing Matthew to gradually process the extraordinary implications of what Robert was suggesting about his true identity and family origin. Claire intensely watched Matthew's face, looking for signs of recognition or emerging memories that could definitively confirm the connection between the young man and the child in the old photograph. "Matthew, I believe with all my heart that you are my son Mike, who got lost as a child and developed amnesia due to trauma. This photograph shows you at 8 years old, a few days before your disappearance," Robert revealed, his voice choked with emotion. Matthew held the photograph with trembling hands, intensely studying every detail of the faded image, while something deep and primitive began to awaken in his fragmented mind. Robert closely observed every micro-expression on the young man's face, looking for signs of recognition or emerging memories that could confirm the emotional connection between Matthew and the child in the photograph. Initially, Matthew showed only confusion and disbelief, finding it impossible that he could be the happy, well-cared-for child he saw in the image, especially considering his only conscious memories of a life of poverty and uncertainty in the orphanage system. But as he continued examining the photograph, something began to change in his expression. A strange familiarity, as if he were looking at a recurring dream he had never been able to fully remember upon waking. His eyes fixed especially on the image of the silver ring that the child was wearing, instinctively comparing it with the identical ring he himself wore and that had been his only connection to a lost past. This ring in the photograph, it's exactly the same as mine. How is this possible? And why do I feel like I've seen this place before, as if it were a dream I have repeatedly? Asked Matthew, his voice revealing a growing confusion. Robert explained that the ring had been a special birthday gift he had given to Mike, and that the child had promised never to take it off because it represented the eternal love between father and son. He described how Mike had disappeared the night after receiving the gift, and how Robert had searched for 15 years for any clue that could lead him back to his lost son. As Robert spoke, Matthew began to experience fragmented flashes of memories that had remained buried in his subconscious during all those years, confused images of a dark-haired man hugging him, sensations of safety and unconditional love, memories of running through the gardens of a large house while someone laughed affectionately watching his games. The memories emerged like pieces of a puzzle that slowly began to fit together, creating an increasingly clear image of a lost childhood that his mind had blocked to protect him from the trauma of forced separation. "I'm beginning to remember fragments. A man who called me son, enormous gardens where I played, a feeling of being completely safe and loved. Could these memories be real?" questioned Matthew, tears beginning to form in his eyes. Claire observed this emotional reunion between father and son with increasingly contradictory and painful feelings, simultaneously feeling happy for the extraordinary discovery and devastated by the possibility of losing Matthew to a family that could offer him everything she had never been able to provide. Robert noticed Claire's silent suffering and made a point of including her in the conversation, explaining to Matthew how Claire had been instrumental in his survival and development during the years of family separation. He described Claire as a heroine who had saved and cared for Mike when Robert couldn't find him, and assured that she would always be considered part of the family, regardless of discoveries about biological kinship. Matthew, still processing the revelations about his identity, immediately sought Claire's hand to demonstrate that his revelations about the past did not diminish in any way the love and gratitude he felt for the woman who had been his family during all those difficult years. "Claire will always be my sister at heart, regardless of discoveries about my biological family. She saved me and made me who I am today," declared Matthew, firmly squeezing her hand. As memories continued to emerge fragmentarily, Matthew began to remember specific details that definitively confirmed his identity as Mike. He remembered calling Robert Daddy in a childish voice, receiving the silver ring as a special gift, promises of eternal love between father and son, playing in the mansion's garden, stories told before bedtime, an absolute feeling of security and happiness that had been brutally interrupted on the night of his disappearance. The memories returned in intense emotional waves, each bringing a mixture of joy for recognition and sadness for the lost years that could never be recovered. Robert wept openly as he listened to Matthew describe memories that he himself kept as precious treasures, confirming beyond any doubt that he had finally found his lost son after 15 years of desperate searching. Claire observed this family reunion with a growing understanding that Matthew now had answers to all the questions that had haunted his life, but also with a growing fear that this discovery meant the end of the special relationship they had built. "Daddy, I remember calling you Daddy. I remember the ring, the gardens, feeling completely loved and protected. How could I forget all this for so long?" asked Matthew, now clearly recognizing Robert as his father. Robert carefully embraced Matthew, taking care not to interfere with the medical equipment, but expressing through physical contact all the paternal love that had been dammed up by 15 years of forced separation. He explained that traumatic amnesia was a natural response of the child's mind to situations of extreme stress, and that Mike had probably blocked family memories as a way to protect himself psychologically during the first difficult years of life on the streets and in the orphanage. She assured Matthew that now that the memories were returning, they could work together to fill in the gaps of the lost years and build a new relationship based on love that had never completely disappeared. Robert also made a point of repeatedly emphasizing that Claire would always be welcome in their lives, acknowledging that she had done the work of raising and caring that he himself should have done during all those years of separation. Robert's gratitude towards Claire was genuine and deep, but Claire was beginning to interpret these assurances as polite courtesy instead of sincere commitments to permanent family inclusion. "Mike, my dear son, now that I've found you again, we'll build a new life together, but always honoring Claire as an essential part of our expanded family," Robert promised, kissing Matthew's forehead. Claire listened to these promises of family inclusion with growing skepticism and pain, interpreting them through the filter of her own fears of abandonment that had been formed during years of instability in the orphanage system. She began to convince herself that Robert was just being polite, and that once Matthew fully recovered and established himself in his new life of privilege, he would gradually distance himself from her in favor of his rich and influential biological family. Claire's inner demons cruelly whispered that she had been merely a temporary substitute, useful during the difficult years, but dispensable now that the true family had been found. Her insecurities were amplified by the impersonal hospital atmosphere and the obvious class difference between her and Robert, who wore expensive clothes and spoke with the confidence of someone accustomed to solving problems through abundant financial resources. Claire began to feel like an intruder observing a family reunion to which she didn't truly belong, despite the polite assurances of inclusion that Robert offered. "You don't need to pretend you want me around out of courtesy. I know that now that Matthew has found his true family, a poor orphanage girl has no place in this story," Claire thought, her pain turning into defensive bitterness. Matthew, still weak from surgery, but emotionally energized by the returning memories, noticed the subtle change in Claire's body language and tried to reassure her that his discoveries about the past didn't change his feelings for her at all. He explained that Claire had been his savior during the most difficult years of his life, when he was completely lost and traumatized, and that this debt of gratitude and love could never be forgotten or diminished by discoveries about his biological family. He promised that regardless of how his life changed from here on, Claire would always have a special place in his heart and in his practical life. Robert reinforced these assurances, specifically offering to pay for Claire to complete her nursing studies and help her establish a stable professional career that would give her financial independence and self-esteem. But Claire interpreted these generous offers as attempts to buy her quiet exit from Matthew's life, conscience payments to facilitate a separation that everyone knew was inevitable. "I don't need your charity, Mr. Robert. I took care of Matthew out of love, not expecting financial rewards or favors from rich people," Claire responded with a defensive coldness that surprised both men. The emotional tension in the hospital room reached a critical point when Claire misinterpreted a casual comment from Robert about the positive changes that would occur in Matthew's life as confirmation of her worst fears about imminent abandonment. Robert had innocently mentioned that Matthew would now have access to the best medical care, university education if he wanted, and career opportunities that his previous financial situation didn't allow. But Claire heard these words as evidence that the simple life she and Matthew had built together would be discarded in favor of a more sophisticated and privileged lifestyle. Her deep insecurities, fed by years of instability and abandonment, transformed Robert's good intentions into perceived threats to the only family she had ever known. Matthew desperately tried to mediate between his newly discovered father and his sister of the heart, but Claire was so consumed by her own emotional wounds that she couldn't rationally process the sincere assurances that both offered. "I always knew this day would come, when Matthew would find better people than me and leave me behind like everyone else has done throughout my life," Claire exploded, years of repressed pain finally finding an outlet. Claire abruptly rose from the chair beside Matthew's bed, her emotions finally overflowing in an explosion of pain, anger, and fear that had been contained by years of forced stoicism. Her hands shook violently as she struggled to control the tears that threatened to reveal the depth of her emotional vulnerability before two people she loved, but now saw as threats to her psychological safety. Matthew tried to reach out to her, but Claire recoiled as if his touch might burn her, her expression revealing a devastating mixture of love and resentment that created a perfect emotional storm. Robert watched with growing horror as he realized that his joy at finding Mike was inadvertently causing suffering to the extraordinary woman who had cared for his son during all the years of separation. The cruel irony of the situation did not go unnoticed. At the moment of his greatest personal happiness, he was witnessing the emotional destruction of someone who deserved only gratitude and love for her sacrifices. "You're going to abandon me now that you found your real family. I won't allow it," Claire shouted, her voice breaking with the intensity of the pain she could no longer contain. Claire ran out of the hospital room with desperate and uncoordinated steps, her words of pain and accusation echoing through the sterile corridors like a ghostly lament that would haunt Robert and Matthew in the days to come. Matthew tried to get up from the bed to follow her, but the intravenous tubes and his post-operative condition prevented him from any significant movement, forcing him to watch helplessly as his sister of the heart disappeared down the corridors with a shattered heart. Robert remained paralyzed for a few seconds, processing the devastating realization that his joy at finding Mike had caused unbearable pain for Claire, transforming what should have been a moment of family celebration into an emotional tragedy that threatened to destroy all the relationships involved. The expression on Matthew's face revealed a deep anguish as he understood that the discovery of his true identity had cost the happiness of the person he loved most in the world, creating an impossible emotional dilemma between his newly discovered biological family and his chosen family that had sustained him through years of hardship. "Dad, I need to go after her immediately. Claire is the most important person in my life, and I can't let her think I'm going to abandon her now that I've found you," Matthew pleaded, fighting against the physical limitations of his medical condition. A week had passed since the devastating revelation at the hospital, and Robert remained seated in his office, holding the sealed envelope containing the definitive results of the DNA test. His hands no longer trembled as they had in previous days, for in his heart he already knew what the result would be before even opening the official document. The laboratory had confirmed with 99.9% certainty that Matthew was indeed Mike, his son lost for 15 years of agony and desperate searching. As he read the scientific numbers and graphs that formalized the miracle that had transformed his life, Robert felt a deep peace mixed with an iron determination to correct the terrible mistake he had made by allowing Claire to leave the hospital believing she would be abandoned. Throughout the week, he had worked tirelessly on a secret project that he hoped would demonstrate to Claire that she was not merely tolerated, but genuinely desired as an integral part of the reunified family. "Now I have the scientific confirmation of what my heart already knew. Mike has come home and I will not allow Claire to feel excluded from this family that she helped preserve," Robert murmured, carefully storing the document in his desk. Robert had spent the entire week coordinating a complete renovation of the east wing of the mansion, transforming a set of empty rooms into an independent but connected house, specifically designed for Claire. He had hired the best architects and decorators in the city, instructing them to create a space that combined elegance with the welcoming comfort that Claire deserved after years of modest living. The new residence included a spacious bedroom overlooking the gardens, a personalized living room, an office where she could study to complete her nursing education, and a modern kitchen equipped with all the appliances that an independent young woman might desire. Robert had personally chosen each piece of furniture and decoration, seeking to create an environment that honored Claire's personality without seeming ostentatious or intimidating. His intention was to demonstrate that Claire would not be a tolerated guest, but rather a genuinely loved adoptive daughter, valued for the extraordinary contribution she had made in Mike's life. If Claire saved my son and transformed him into the admirable man he is today, then she deserves to be treated as the daughter I never had. This house will be the tangible symbol of my commitment to our expanded family, Robert reflected while supervising the final details of the renovation. During these days of preparation, Robert had also spent long hours talking with Mike about Claire's importance in their lives and developing strategies to convince her to return. Mike, still recovering from surgery but emotionally strengthened by the reunion with his father, had provided valuable insights into Claire's psychology and her deep fears of abandonment. Together, father and son had carefully planned every aspect of the surprise, from the decoration of the new house to the exact words they would use to convince Claire that she was genuinely wanted and needed. Mike had insisted that Robert understand that Claire was not just important to him, but had become an essential part of his identity and could not simply be replaced by biological family reconnections. Robert had absorbed these lessons with humility, recognizing that there was much to learn about the life Mike had built during the 15 years of separation. "Dad, Claire is not just my foster sister. She is the reason I became a good and resilient person. Without her, I would never have survived emotionally in the orphanage," Mike explained with absolute conviction. On the morning chosen for the surprise, Robert had finally managed to convince Claire to visit them through a carefully planned phone call, where Mike had begged her to give him a chance to explain his true feelings. Claire had reluctantly agreed, but only after making Mike promise that the visit would be brief and that she could leave immediately if she felt uncomfortable. Robert had spent the entire morning obsessively checking every detail of the surprise, from the newly installed plaque at the entrance of the new residence to the fresh flowers he had ordered placed in every room. When he finally heard the sound of Claire's simple car arriving at the property, Robert felt his heart race with a mixture of nervousness and hope, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether his family could be truly reunified or would remain forever fragmented by pain and misunderstandings. "This is our only chance to demonstrate to Claire that she is not an intruder, but rather the missing piece to complete our family. I cannot fail now," thought Robert, watching Claire and Mike walk slowly toward the garden. Claire got out of the car with hesitant movements and a cautious expression that revealed her reluctance to be there, clearly prepared for a difficult conversation that she anticipated would end with a definitive farewell. Mike, still walking more slowly due to his recovery from surgery, approached her with a warm smile that tried to disguise his own anxiety about how Claire would react to the surprise they had prepared. Robert observed both of their body language with complete attention, noting how Claire avoided direct eye contact and maintained a physical distance that suggested her intention to leave quickly after fulfilling her promise to hear what Mike had to say. The tension in the air was palpable, with all three aware that this moment would permanently define the structure of their future relationships. Robert took a deep breath and approached the couple with determined steps, carrying the symbolic keys to the new house that Claire had not yet noticed. "Claire, thank you for coming. I know it wasn't easy for you to accept our invitation, but we needed this opportunity to clarify some very important misunderstandings," said Robert, his voice carrying genuine sincerity. Robert gestured for Claire and Mike to follow him toward the east wing of the mansion, explaining that there was something very special he wanted to show them both before any serious conversation about the future. Claire followed reluctantly, clearly confused about why Robert was taking them to a part of the property she had never visited before. When they finally arrived at the entrance of the newly renovated residence, Claire stopped abruptly upon seeing the elegant plaque that decorated the main door. "Johnson Martinez family," engraved in golden letters on noble wood. Her expression changed instantly from confusion to absolute shock as she understood that the sign included her surname along with Robert's, suggesting a family integration she had never imagined possible. Mike observed Claire's reaction with intense attention, his own eyes filling with tears at seeing the emotion his sister of the heart was trying to control. "Robert, what does this sign mean? Why is my name included with yours?" asked Claire, her voice trembling with a mixture of cautious hope and disbelief. Robert handed the keys to the new residence to Claire with a solemn gesture loaded with meaning, explaining that he had spent the entire week creating a home specifically for her within the family property. He described in detail each room that had been designed with her needs and preferences in mind, from the office where she could study to the equipped kitchen where she could develop her culinary skills. He explained that the independent house had been built to ensure Claire had total privacy and autonomy, but remained close enough to fully participate in daily family life. Robert emphasized that this was not charity or a temporary offer motivated by guilt, but rather a permanent recognition that Claire was genuinely considered his adoptive daughter, and that Mike would never be truly complete without her by his side. His words were carefully chosen to directly address the fears of abandonment that had motivated Claire's desperate flight from the hospital. "Claire, this house is yours by right, not charity. You saved my son and transformed him into the extraordinary man he is today. That makes you my daughter, as much as Mike is my son," declared Robert with absolute conviction. Claire held the keys with trembling hands, struggling to process the reality that Robert had literally built a house for her, demonstrating through concrete actions that his words about family inclusion were genuine and permanent. Mike approached her and gently held her free hands, explaining that he had actively participated in planning the surprise because he wanted her to know that finding his biological father did not diminish in any way the love and gratitude he felt for her. He described how he had spent the entire week educating Robert about Claire's importance in his life, ensuring that his father understood that any future that did not include Claire would be unacceptable to him. Mike explained that the discovery of his true identity had been simultaneously wonderful and terrifying, as he feared it could mean losing the only family he had consciously known. His words revealed an emotional maturity that demonstrated how Claire had truly done an exceptional job raising him. "Claire, you're not just my sister. You're the reason I became capable of loving and trusting again." "I cannot imagine a life without you by my side," confessed Mike, tears streaming down his cheeks. Gradually, Claire's emotional defenses began to crumble as she absorbed the reality that both Robert and Mike genuinely desired her permanent presence in their lives. She entered the new residence with hesitant steps, exploring each carefully decorated room and noticing the personal details that revealed how much thought and care had been invested in creating a space that honored her personality and needs. The office included nursing books and study materials she had mentioned wanting. The kitchen was equipped with professional utensils that would allow her to explore her passion for cooking, and the bedroom had been decorated with colors and textures that reflected her modest but elegant personal taste. Claire understood that this house was not just a grand gesture, but a tangible demonstration that Robert had really listened to and valued everything Mike had told him about her. It was impossible to fake this level of attention to detail without genuine and lasting care. "You really thought of every detail to make me feel at home. How can I continue doubting you when you demonstrate such care and consideration?" whispered Claire, finally allowing hope to replace fear. Mike embraced Claire warmly in the center of the new living room, his emotions finally overflowing in tears of joy and relief at having recovered the sister of his heart, whom he had feared losing forever. Robert joined the family hug, creating a circle of love that symbolized the definitive union of two families that had been separated by circumstances but reunited by destiny and the conscious will to build something new and beautiful together. In the garden where everything had begun, with Mike once again proudly wearing the silver ring that had served as a bridge between his lost past and his recovered present, the three remained embraced while the sun set over the property that now housed a truly complete family. Mike looked at his father and Claire, understanding that he had received the rare gift of having two families that complemented each other perfectly: the biological family that had created him with love, and the chosen family that had saved and shaped him during the most formative years of his life. "Now I have a complete family, the father who conceived me and the sister who saved me. You two are the most important people in the world to me, and I don't want to live a single day without both of you by my side," declared Mike, definitively sealing the reunification of his expanded family. Now tell me in the comments where you're from and tell me, did you like this story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like and check out the next one waiting for you here on screen. I'll be waiting for you there.